recently it has come out that Bernie Sanders has been promoted by AIPAC on Twitter because he refuses to call for a ceasefire with Israel's conflict with Hamas, which you'd think someone who's left-wing can see that this is not a conflict when nearly 20,000 people have been killed, and how many of them are actually insurgent fighters? Absolute tiny minority of them. But anyway, why I wanted to make this video, I am streaming right now, but it's going to be a video, is because I want to contextualize Bernie's support for Israel and try and make it make more sense. Because on the surface, you're seeing Bernie on an AIPAC Twitter account like this, and you're thinking, like, what the hell is wrong with him? He's betrayed me. Like, he's betrayed himself, actually. Like, Bernie somehow, on this one issue today, has gone against his whole political career. And I want to contextualize, like, leftist support for Israel historically, why people supported Israel on the left, Israel's own, like, internal structure being something that is socialistic back in the day, and people not realizing the hypocrisy of, making socialism as a settler colony is not socialism. So anyway, this is what AIPAC wrote the other day, saying, thank you, Bernie Sanders, for your strong opposition to a permanent ceasefire with Hamas. I'm going to play it. If you can't hear it, I'll just give you the gist. It's only 30 seconds.
I don't know how you can have a permanent ceasefire with Hamas, who has said before October 7th and after October 7th that they want to destroy Israel. They want a permanent war. I don't know how you have a permanent ceasefire with an attitude like that.
What Bernie's saying there is something you see a lot with pro-Israel supporters. And it's mainly based on, historically, things Hamas has said, Hamas's old charter from the 1980s, which does say a lot of terrible stuff about what they want to do to Israeli Jews. And I want to contextualize this on two fronts, in that Bernie Sanders is a Jew whose family were killed in World War II. He was alive for World War II, I believe, as well, when he was a kid. So he's grown up as a Jew in America who has felt the consequences of the Nazi and has seen the rise of Israel. Like, he is older than Israel, Bernie Sanders, right? And he's also left-wing. And then you're thinking, like, how can he think this? And what I'm going to say throughout this video is different things, but I think one thing people don't realize is that with older Zionists like Bernie, is they remember things like different wars, like the 6-Day War. And in the 6-Day War, you would have more like rhetoric from Arab leaders, which was more reminiscent of stuff you'd hear in World War II towards the Jews, right? And because a lot of them were survivors of that, they connected the two things together. And then forever, they just associate the two things together. And what he doesn't probably, I don't know, he can't move past his own bias, is that most people fighting on the ground right now, like actually on the ground, are like, have never lived in a Palestinian run Gaza, which has not, it's always been run by Hamas, hasn't it? So they took over in 2006, 2005, 2006, after they won the election, right? Basically just ended any semblance of Palestinian democracy there. So there's a bunch of people fighting right now who were born after it. They were born after that election. And it's like if you grow up in Iran, for example, right? If you join the military or you join the government, like the civil service or whatever, the Iranian government, which a lot of us disagree with because it's so religious, they run everything. But they are the government. The same with Hamas in Gaza. That is the government. And obviously not all Palestinians who live in Gaza like them. But you have to reconcile a lot of these kids who are fighting. If you're 18 years old fighting right now, you don't know any different. You can't even leave. You can't even leave, right? So basing your support for a ceasefire on the political elite for Hamas and what they've said in the past and what they say, and some charters going back like 40 years, like Bernie should realize this isn't the same thing. But like I'm saying, contextualize him as a Jewish person, and you understand, you can see his bias and you can see why he doesn't want to say you can't have a ceasefire with them, because how could you? Because if they had their way, they do this. But the thing is, this is the more part I can't understand. Israel are so powerful. Like, they're not actually under threat, are they, from an insurgent group? Like, they have nuclear weapons. They have the most, like, militarized society probably in the world, and they have one of the biggest armed forces as a percentage of their population in the world as well. And it's a very, like, it's an armed forces that, although isn't very battle tested these days, historically has been a good like military for defeating neighboring countries, right? It literally defeated like 5 at once in the 6-Day War. So to act like having a ceasefire or like, Hamas can't be peaceful is obviously just racism as well. In that you feel like just because people are part of this group, they literally run the whole territory and have done for nearly 20 years, they can't be reasoned with. But of course they can. Some of the people there, they've never left and they were born after the election. Do you not think there's normal people? And also, it's not as tightly controlled as people think in that obviously they go for training, they study the ideology of the organization, but a lot of these people are just rando people who have their family killed by the Israelis and then they join. Like it's like joining the army, isn't it? And even when I went to West Belfast and an ex-IRA soldier was talking to me, he's like, because we're talking about the provincial IRA, the more Catholic one, not the socialist one. He said, I don't even care about religion. I just joined because they killed 2 people in my tower block, the British Army. So I joined the IRAs. I've never given a shit about Catholicism. If you can understand that, you can understand why a rando person would join Hamas without agreeing with their politics. So you can't believe that every single person who joins that organization to fight back in the context of Gaza is some sort of monster who can't be reasoned with. It's just racism. And it's just Zionist propaganda that Bernie has sadly been indoctrinated with. So that's like why he supports or doesn't support a ceasefire. Because like I said, he grew up at this time where Israel's existence was actually threatened. Obviously, I believe it's illegitimate settler colony, but it was actually threatened of being destroyed by other Arab states like Egypt and Syria, for example, right? And they would say stuff about the Jews generally, which would be reminiscent of the rhetoric you'd hear from fascists in World War II. So Bernie associates all of that with Hamas right now because they've said similar stuff in the past. But again, context is important. Like I said, young people, if you're 18 years old, you've never left Gaza, you've probably had family killed by the Israelis, and also you don't know anything different than Hamas running Gaza. So what are you meant to do if you wanted to fight back, right? I've said this before, like, you can have your problems with the organization, you can have your problems with the political elite and their ideology, but to act like every single, and obviously there are bad people who are in these organizations, right? But to act like every single one of them is some unhinged like Nazi or something is how they get you. Bernie actually came out and said something because everyone knows AIPAC is just like a Republican front. He says, AIPAC is a right-wing organization that supports extremist Republican election-denying candidates. Now they want to spend $100 million to defeat progressives. Whether AIPAC likes it or not, the US must not give a blank check to Netanyahu's horrific war policies. So this is something else to notice, that Bernie Sanders has been very anti-Netanyahu, but we all know Bernie Sanders has been anti-Netanyahu. Plenty of Israelis hate Netanyahu, but only a small percentage are actually against the war. It's like less than 5% from a poll I saw the other day. It was like 1.3% said the IDF are using too much firepower on Gaza. So that's not even an endorsement against the war. It's literally like they think it's too much, but maybe not wrong overall. That's 1.3% of the people surveyed in this poll in Israel. And this gets to the heart of the issue. Why would someone like Bernie Sanders support Israel when we know he's a leftist? He even used to say he was a socialist, Marxist and stuff like that when he was younger. It's because, like I said, we're contextualizing it. He's older than Israel. He grew up at a time where everyone probably he knew had family you lost in World War II, living in somewhere like Brooklyn in the 40s and 50s. And then you see Israel emerge, all the stuff I've said. And also, it was super common for leftists to support Israel in this time as well. Very common. And here's a good example for you that I'll elaborate on. Ben Gurion reveals suggestions of North Vietnamese communist leader. And it kind of links in nicely with why German leftists support Israel. So Ho Chi Minh suggested to David Ben Gurion in 1946 that he proclaim a Jewish government in exile and establish such a government's headquarters in North Vietnam, Ben Gurion revealed. Addressing a rally here, which the audience included many young people, most of them students, Israel's former prime minister disclosed that information in telling of his meeting with Ho Chi Minh in Paris, where he and the North Vietnam leader lived in the same hotel. They had become very friendly, Mr. Ben-Gurion said, and in the course of one conversation, the North Vietnam leader made the suggestion that after Mr. Ben-Gurion had told him of the Jewish problem for obvious reasons, Ben-Gurion said this was unacceptable. Ben-Gurion said that he felt that if he should write to Ho Chi Minh, the latter might invite him to visit North Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh said he should proclaim a Jewish government in exile in 1946, right? So Ho Chi Minh, Marxist, who was fighting colonialism in his own country, fighting imperialism, fighting Vichy French and Japanese colonialism in World War II, fighting French colonialism just after the war, and later would be fighting American colonialism as well. And why would someone like Ho Chi Minh, Marxist, anti-imperialist, say to Ben-Gurion, you can set up your government in exile in North Vietnam? And it, like I said, it plays into the German leftist things, is lots of people, for one reason or another, and I say left and leftism, racism plays a big role in this, they viewed the Jewish Zionist movement as some sort of land back for indigenous people. So European Jews going to Palestine and creating this settler colony was actually like a leftist thing to support. Just like you support Ho Chi Minh going back to Vietnam from basically his self-imposed exile and like studying in China and stuff like that, going back to Vietnam and taking the fight to the colonialists, he supported the Zionists doing this too. First to the British mandate and then to the Arabs generally, but you know, the Palestinians mainly, right? Because they see what you often see in the rhetoric, Arab colonizers of Palestine, because of historically Palestine being a province of like the Roman Empire and stuff, and then obviously conquered by Arab caliphates later on, but ignoring the fact that, you know, just because different people ruled it doesn't mean Palestinians haven't been there for basically its whole history as well. I know there was a Jewish exile, but do you think Jews exclusively were the only people who lived in this territory ever? They viewed it as finally these people are coming home and they're creating this state. And also because these people were socialists, even better. They're not only going home to create this state in terms of an anti-imperialist thing, like get the British out, get those Arab colonizers out, they're also creating socialism too. Because what you had in the lead up to the 1940s, generally with Zionism, you had, I think it's revisionist Zionism, which is like the extreme religious form. And then you have liberal Labour Zionism, leftist Zionism, which became more of the dominant one, especially because of so many of the leaders basically being socialist, or a lot of the soldiers being people who fought for communist, socialist groups in the Second World War and stuff. So what you had is all these people coming to Palestine, and that's why everyone was like, oh, great. So with the Allies from World War II, they're like, you know, this is right because of what happened to them from the Germans. And also we don't have to, you know, not really our problem anymore. Just go to Palestine, which is a British colony, but, you know, Britain can't really hang on to it anymore. So you take it over. You go create your own country there. You're out of our hair. You're out of Europe's hair. We don't care about that anymore. And then for the socialists, like the Soviet Union was the first country to support Israel. They're like, great. Socialist Jews are setting up their own country in the Middle East, and they'll be our allies. And the people who armed Israel for the Arab-Israeli War and its founding were the Soviets. Through Czechoslovakia, they gave them Soviet weapons and they gave them captured German weapons from World War II, which is obviously like a weird full circle moment. And why the Soviet Union didn't keep supporting Israel is not because suddenly they thought, oh, we don't like settler colonialism, we don't like this Jewish socialist country. It's because the ambassador to the Soviet Union said, let Soviet Jews come to Israel. And Stalin said no, because if he said yes, that is admitting to the world that he has failed the Jews, because obviously you guys might know that the Soviet Union had tried to set up Jewish autonomous zones in the Soviet Union for Jews to have their own territory and stuff. But yeah, Stalin said no, because if I accept this, then I'm accepting the Soviet dream of, you know, building socialism as failed. Because if these Jews want to leave, then we've done something wrong there, right? So they fell out over that, and then quickly the British and the French came in and be like, no, we'll support you. Just make sure you have our interests at heart. And obviously it helped that Israel was very multicultural in terms of everyone coming from different countries. So you had like ex-British soldiers, ex-French soldiers from the war. They go there, and you have like a more like Western style democracy, which they love as well. So then that switch where the Soviets started helping the Arabs instead, because then they viewed Israel as a Western proxy. And also, this is part of the reason why anti-Semitism really ramped up in Russia, because they said, well, if you're a Jew, you're an Israeli spy. Israel's friends with Britain and France, so you're spying for them. And obviously you have stuff like the Rudolf Slansky trial. You have a crackdown on what they see as like Jewish subversives in the Soviet Union as well, because of this whole Israel issue. And obviously later on you have the communist bloc really supporting Palestine, especially East Germany, which is one of the biggest pro-Palestinian countries. Yeah, so that is like why leftists support them. And then what you have, which we're going to get into in a sec, is you had the kibbutz. Now the kibbutz is basically what socialists want, kind of. It's communal living. It's a socialist like village set, but obviously the problem is it's also an Israeli settlement built on stolen land. What you had was people, socialists around the world, they obviously are racist, so they don't see Arabs as equally human anyway. So they're happy to have white European Jews go there and create a country. But also now, not only is the dominant ideology of the Israeli government socialist, the Israeli settlers, well, not all of them, but some of them are also socialist as well. And they're expanding Israeli territory through socialist Israeli settlements, where everyone works together. And think of something like Jackson in The Last of Us, which is actually created by an Israeli guy who grew up in not a socialist settlement, he grew up in a revisionist settlement, which is more like religious extremist one. And you understand why in this era, socialists supported Israel. And Bernie Sanders grew up in this era. And where the big thing changed is the 6-Day War. And why it changed is because Israel, all the problems, come from this. With Israel defeating the other Arab states they're fighting against, they started taking more and more land. So 1948, you get the borders of Israel agreed by the UN. And after the 6-Day War, they're massively increased, even places in the Sinai Desert. And what you had then was America firmly supporting Israel, because they said, oh, you guys are great at fighting. We don't need to be in the Middle East anymore. We don't want two Vietnams at the same time. So you can be our proxy. So Israel, we're going to support you 100%. We don't care that you're socialist. We don't care about any of that. We will support you fighting the Arabs because they're backed by the Soviet Union. And you can be our proxy with Iran, which used to be obviously in the pocket of America with the Shah. So that's where you had that there. And then like I said, the kibbutz system, Bernie Sanders went to live in Israel before the 6-Day War, before all the issues we see today. Well, I mean, obviously the issues go back to 1948, but a lot of the issues today are more centered around the 1967 land grab from the war. So Bernie Sanders worked on an Israeli commune in the 60s that could have influenced his politics. Famous for his progressive politics, Bernie Sanders is once again running for president, but Bernie Sanders' progressive political beliefs appear to date all the way back to his youth. In fact, Sanders spent several months during his early 20s living on an Israeli kibbutz, a small collective community and farm that was built on many of the same ideals that are now hallmarks of his political movement. Sanders said that in 1963 he lived and volunteered at Shah Hamakim, an Israeli kibbutz near the city of Haifa, according to an Israeli newspaper, which unearthed an interview in 1990 where he talked about this. While Sanders likely spent much of his time at the kibbutz working in the fields, picking apples, peaches and pears with other volunteers, he also would have been exposed to the social democratic ideology in which the kibbutz operated then and now, according to Yair Miron, the kibbutz's current chairman, who spoke to the Times of Israel in 2016. Our values of mutual responsibility and social democratic values, and we choose willingly to create that society. Sanders is talking about the social democratic approach that gives freedom to the individual, but with the responsibility for the whole. We do that in a practical way. Marom added that all of the community's members were equal in every way. They live in identical houses. There wasn't a salary. Everyone received according to their needs. The kibbutz gave everything: food, shelter, education, and health. Albert Eli said to CNN in 2016 that the kibbutz's socialist ideology could well have influenced young Sanders. It's a number of people who want to live together and want to share everything. We think that you have to take care of the weak. The strong can deal with themselves. The kibbutz we're talking about, founded in 1935 by Romanian and Yugoslavian Jewish immigrants. Shah Hamakim was part of the Hashoma Hatzaya, a socialist youth movement The kibbutz was affiliated with Mapam, the political party to the left of the Israeli Labour Party. The kibbutz was a full commune, says Irit Drury, a 72-year-old former secretary of the kibbutz. Typical of the time, children were raised in a dormitory apart from their parents who lived in small apartments. So like I said, Bernie Sanders went to go live in a socialist commune Israeli settlement before the left, broadly the Western left, had turned against Israel for the Six-Day War and their land grab after the Six-Day War, where they just would not give back Palestinian territory. They'd expanded Israel to be far bigger than its original borders. So like I said, young Bernie Sanders, he lived in a socialist commune. He grew up in a time where most of the Jewish community had family or friends who were killed in World War II by the fascists. And then you had the same sort of rhetoric coming out from certain Arab nations towards Israel, which, again, most of the left support at this time. Israel was seen as a socialist country. That's why the Soviet Union supported it originally. And then he goes to live in a commune where he experiences like real socialism for the first time. And in his head, he's thinking, Israel's a great country for this, right? They're building socialism. They're building equality. But the racism comes into play then at the expense of who? Where are these settlements? Yeah, sure, some are in the borders of Israel. But especially after 1967, most of them are illegal. And a lot of them are still illegal to this day, right? They're still illegal. The UN, and even a lot of Western countries recognise them as illegal. Even the ones supporting Israel right now recognise a lot of these settlements are built on illegal stolen land. Even if you agree with the 1948 borders, even if you are born with the 1967 borders, a lot of countries still don't agree with these settlements, right? So Bernie Sanders actually goes there, you know, probably formative years to him. Where else in the world can you go and live in socialism for a little bit, right? But again, because of the context, he's not seeing what this alleged socialism is actually built on. And it's built on a settler colony which was forced upon a group of people which they had to ethnically cleanse and kill hundreds of thousands of people to create for themselves, right? And this, you know, settlement project by different groups of various different ideologies was part of expanding this even further. But again, for him, that is probably extremely hard to divorce. And again, these aren't excuses for him. It's just trying to tell people, if you're confused about why Bernie can't support a ceasefire, I'm telling you this is the reasons why. And it's not that suddenly he's become reactionary in his old age, or suddenly he's gone against his political beliefs. This stuff is part of his political beliefs. Israeli socialism is a core part of his political beliefs. And like I said, when he was growing up, most of the left in the West supported Israel for socialistic reasons, not a part of like some Western chauvinist reasons, for socialistic reasons, because they believed it was a socialist country. Now, if we look at actually Bernie's record on this stuff, I want to go through it, and I think this is it's a Politico article. And it's funny because when he was running against Hillary Clinton, they were accusing him of not being pro-Israel enough. Because, like I said, his disagreements with Netanyahu are because he's like an Israeli-style socialist. He's not an Israeli, obviously. I mean, he could become one if he wanted, but he's not. But he agrees with the Israeli left. Historically, he's seen what he feels is like socialism being created by the Israeli left, by a political movement to the left of the Israeli Labour Party. So he views Netanyahu from that. Like, you are destroying Israel, but Israel is good. That's what people need to understand. He thinks Israel is a good thing because of the context, because of racism, because of all this different stuff. So the Politico article says, early in his political career, Sanders didn't conceal his frustration with Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. During one March 1988 news conference when he was mayor of Burlington, Sanders called brutal Israeli treatment of Palestinian protesters an absolute disgrace. He says, the sight of Israeli soldiers breaking the arms and legs of Arabs is reprehensible and must be condemned. I mean, interesting use of the word Arabs there. A few months later, Sanders went further. The policy that Israelis shoot people is unacceptable. It is wrong that the US provides arms to Israel, he declared, according to a local newspaper at the time. In 1991, Sanders voted to withhold $82.5 million in US aid for Israel unless it stopped settlement activity in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. That motion was rejected on a 44 to 378 vote. So this is an interesting point right here, because you might be thinking, well, you've just said he grew up grew up, but he went to an Israeli settlement to work when he was in his 20s, right? But here it is, stopped settlement activity in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Funnily enough, I actually just found this leaflet from a pro-Palestinian protest. I'm going to show it for you here. So it's pretty ragged now. But you've probably seen this map, but look, there's original Israel. This one. That's what it originally was. In white, I think. Yeah, the white is what it originally is. And that's it after 1967. So Bernie went to that one. He didn't to work on a settlement. He didn't go to that one to work on a settlement. So that's what I mean. The Israeli left are not so much for just completely taking over the whole territory. So that's why he does this. This is why he supports Israel. He even worked on a settlement. But then you have that, where he's one of the only 44 people who votes to withhold this aid unless it stops these settlements in the West Bank and Gaza. Going on to say, a decade later, he was the only Jewish member of Congress not to back a House resolution condemning Palestinians and expressing solidarity with Israel after a Palestinian attack killed dozens. He voted present and the measure passed 384 to 11. One Jewish Democrat who served as a senior aide to Sanders on Capitol Hill and has also worked for a leading pro-Israel organization, said his stances on Israel are not a political liability. His views on Israel were pretty consistent with centre-left people. There was never any question like whether the country should exist or anything. He was a pro-peace process member, but the former aide added that Sanders tended to put more emphasis on the rights and suffering of Palestinians, more than many other members of Congress. If you talked about Israel, he would always talk about the suffering of Palestinians as well. In DC, that can be seen by some people as being anti-Israel. Although he has recently tempered his criticisms of Israel, Sanders is still not considered an ally by Washington's pro-Israel community. In early 2015, after it was announced that Netanyahu would deliver a 2015 address to a joint meeting of Congress arranged by John Boehner, Sanders was the first senator to announce he would not attend the speech. So what I've been trying to make the clear point for you with this is how Bernie Sanders can reconcile not calling for a ceasefire, being against Netanyahu, being against illegal Israeli settlements, how he can reconcile all of that with also not supporting a ceasefire. And like I said, it's a long history. He's an old man, his own political views, his own family history, his own history of like being an American Jew, going to a kibbutz in the early 60s before the 6-Day War, before Israel was expanded far past its 1948 borders. And then you have all of that baggage. Then you have a group like Hamas, who's in the past had said some very terrible things, reminiscent of what fascists used to say in the Second World War. And then you have this. You have this, where he is far better on Palestinian rights than most people in American politics, but he still won't call for a ceasefire. Because again, he views it in a certain way. And I'd say the main thing you can't understand, I'm not saying I agree with what he's saying, I'm trying to make you understand why this isn't something he views as contradictory to his politics. He doesn't think what he's doing right now, oh my God, I've betrayed the left, I've betrayed my voters, I've betrayed all these people who campaigned for me. He doesn't think that, because he can reconcile all of this with himself. And that's the point I'm trying to make today, is that yes, should Bernie Sanders see Israel for what it is? Of course he should. Of course he should. Should he call for a ceasefire? It's literally the bare minimum. Should he do all these things? Is he putting his whole legacy at risk right now? And basically destroying his own legacy by doing this? Yes, you know, we're not asking him to say Israel shouldn't exist, right? I don't think anyone is expecting that of him. We're asking for him to call for a ceasefire. But he can only view it through the prism of the Israeli political spectrum, where because he was worked with the Israeli left, he hates Netanyahu. But he doesn't necessarily hate everything Israel does. He doesn't think Israel doesn't have a right to exist. He doesn't view it as a settler colony. He doesn't even, view it as this terrible place. Because he has all this baggage in his mind. He doesn't see it clearly. He doesn't see it like the rest of us. And that's why he can be better on Palestinian rights, but still be trash on this stuff. He basically, to me, is an old school Zionist from like the 1940 to 60 period. That's his politics. And he can reconcile that because most of the left used to support Israel. Most of the world used to think it was socialist. Americans hated Israel because they thought it was a bunch of socialist Jews creating a country, right? Americans didn't used to like Israel. And what you had in American politics was something you had in Israeli politics, where you had the religious fundamentalists sweep into power, where Israel used to be secular, Israel used to be socialist, the same way America used to be more secular. Then you have Ronald Reagan unleashing evangelicals as a political force, and then suddenly everyone everywhere is a massive Zionist. What you had in American politics is the left abandoned Israel because of the Six-Day War. Then you have the right embracing Israel because of Christian Zionism. Then you have liberals embracing Zionism because of geopolitics and Western chauvinism. And then you have hangers-on like Bernie, who are like more old school leftist Zionist, and then he just can't let go of that. So yeah, it's sad because he is ruining his legacy, but at the same time, what I'm trying to tell people is this isn't him being like doing a 180 on anything. This is very consistent with his actual politics. It's just because in the Overton window of America, where everyone these days is so insanely pro-Israel, he seems like he's against Israel by comparison, but he's really not. And I guess that's what I wanted to say.